Attention, brave souls. What you're about to witness might make your heart race. Before the suspense takes over your screen, click subscribe now and hit the like button. Get ready for a spine-chilling experience. But be warned, only the boldest will survive until the end.
My name is Caleb Walker. I'm 34 years old, an anthropologist by trade, and for most of my career, a seeker of stories buried in the folds of time. My work has taken me to places where myth and history blur. A delicate line, I've always been obsessed with walking. That obsession led me to the Grand Canyon, and what I'm about to tell you is as much a confession as it is a warning. It began with an old journal. I wasn't supposed to have it. It was handed to me discreetly during a symposium on indigenous folklore, a tattered leather-bound relic reeking of age and secrets. Its pages were filled with handwritten entries from the late 1800s, written by someone who had clearly lived through unspeakable things. The name on the inside cover was Samuel Reed, a settler who had gone missing along with his group over 150 years ago. The journal contained chilling sketches, human-like figures with stretched, distorted limbs and hollow eyes looming over campfires. There were desperate entries detailing encounters with the Pale One, a spirit said to guard sacred ground deep within the Grand Canyon. But it wasn't just Reed's words that gripped me. It was the connection to my own bloodline. You see, my great-great-grandmother, Mourning Dove, was Cherokee. She used to tell my family stories about a guardian spirit that would protect the canyon's secrets at any cost. It watches, she'd say, and it decides who leaves whole and who doesn't leave at all. Those words had haunted me as a child, and now they felt like a calling. Despite my training, my supposed logic, I convinced myself this was just another story to be unraveled, another piece of folklore to document. I packed my gear and made arrangements to journey to the north rim of the canyon alone. It was off-season, which meant fewer tourists and a better chance of following the clues uninterrupted. When I arrived, the air itself seemed heavy, almost oppressive. The canyon stretched before me like a vast wound in the earth, its layers of red rock holding the weight of centuries. I met with a local Cherokee elder named Lily Standing Bear, hoping she might provide more insight into the legends. Instead, she gave me something else, a dire warning. "You don't belong there," she said flatly, her dark eyes piercing through me like arrows. "The Pale One doesn't forgive, it doesn't forget, and it doesn't care why you've come." I remember brushing off her words. Though I tried to be respectful, I told myself she was being protective of her heritage, suspicious of outsiders like me. But deep down, her warning gnawed at me. It was the first thread of unease that would eventually unravel everything. I began my hike the next morning, the journal tucked safely in my pack. The trail was long and winding, the kind that makes you feel as though you're walking straight into the past. At first, the canyon seemed peaceful, almost serene. But as I descended further, that peace began to feel like something else, something watchful. The first sign came about 3 hours into the trek. I stopped to take a break near a small cluster of trees, their twisted roots clawing at the rocky soil. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper. At first I thought it was the wind, but then it became unmistakable. Caleb. It was my name. Soft, almost playful, carried on the breeze. I froze, heart hammering, scanning the area for any sign of another person, but there was no one. Just the vast emptiness of the canyon and the distant cry of a hawk overhead. I shook it off as fatigue, maybe a trick of the mind, and pressed on. But the deeper I went, the more the canyon seemed to change. Shadows seemed to stretch too far, curling around corners where no light should reach. The air grew colder, sharper, biting at my skin despite the sun blazing above. And then I found it, the first clue. A rock formation described in the journal, shaped like a jagged spear pointing skyward. Beneath it, partially hidden by a mound of earth, was something unexpected, an old silver locket. Inside was a photograph, faded almost beyond recognition, of a young woman. Scribbled beneath it were the words, "My beloved Sarah." Forgive me. I didn't know it yet, but that locket was the first crack in the barrier between my world and something far older, far darker. By nightfall, I had reached the entrance to a cave described in the journal. Its opening yawned before me like a mouth waiting to swallow. As I stared into its depths, a sudden, gut-wrenching dread washed over me, unlike anything I'd ever felt. But I had come too far to turn back, and besides, I told myself, legends are just stories, a lie I would cling to for as long as I could. The moment I stepped deeper into the canyon, the world seemed to change. The air felt heavier, almost liquid, as if it were pressing against my skin, making every breath feel like a laborious task. The journal in my hand seemed to hum with a strange energy, its brittle pages whispering secrets I wasn't meant to know. Shadows danced on the canyon walls, cast by nothing I could see. I told myself it was my imagination, the product of too much caffeine and too little sleep, but deep down, I knew better. Something was watching. The trail narrowed, leading me to a thicket of gnarled trees that seemed to stretch their limbs in warning. My flashlight caught glimpses of claw-like branches, their skeletal silhouettes twitching in the soft breeze. I tightened my grip on the journal, flipping to the last page I had read. The words were scrawled in frantic handwriting. Follow the path to the cave. The truth lies within, but beware the guardian. I hesitated, my heart pounding against my ribs. The Cherokee elder's warning echoed in my mind. You're meddling in things you don't understand. The Pale One doesn't forgive. Her voice had been firm, her eyes unyielding, but curiosity is a cruel master. It whispers to you in moments of doubt, urging you forward, even when every instinct screams for you to turn back. The cave appeared suddenly, as if it had materialized from the shadows themselves. Its entrance yawned wide, a jagged maw in the rock, framed by ancient carvings etched into the stone. I ran my fingers over the symbols, their grooves rough and weathered. They depicted figures kneeling before a towering, shapeless form. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light across the carvings. For a brief moment, I thought I saw the figures move, their postures shifting ever so slightly. I stumbled back, heart racing, but the carvings were still. My mind was playing tricks, or so I convinced myself. Inside the cave, the air grew colder. The light from the entrance quickly faded, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The beam of my flashlight seemed weaker here, its glow barely penetrating the void. The silence was absolute, the kind that presses against your eardrums until you start to hear the phantom pulse of your own blood. As I ventured further, I noticed more carvings, their details growing increasingly disturbing. Twisted faces, frozen in silent screams, stared back at me. Scenes of torment and chaos lined the walls, each more grotesque than the last. One carving depicted a man clawing at his own eyes, his face contorted in agony. Another showed figures fleeing from a towering shadow that seemed to stretch endlessly upward. A low hum began to fill the air, faint at first but growing steadily louder. It wasn't mechanical. It was organic, like a deep, guttural chant resonating from the walls themselves. My breath quickened, fogging in the icy air. I turned a corner and froze. At the far end of the chamber, a crude altar stood, surrounded by a circle of jagged rocks. On it lay a collection of objects, animal bones, feathers, and what looked like human teeth. My stomach churned, and I felt the urge to turn back. But as I stepped closer, something on the wall above the altar caught my eye. A phrase carved deeply into the stone. It read, "Turn back before it consumes your soul." A sudden gust of wind rushed through the cave, extinguishing my flashlight. Darkness swallowed me whole, a void so complete that I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or shut. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for the light, my fingers trembling. Then, I heard it, a whisper. It wasn't a sound. It was a presence, brushing against my mind like cold, bony fingers. The voice was faint, distant, but unmistakable. It called my name. Caleb. The sound was slow, deliberate, and stretched like a dying breath. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice echoing back at me in a mockery of my fear. The whisper came again, closer this time. "You shouldn't have come." My heart thundered in my chest as I finally managed to flick the flashlight back on. The beam illuminated the altar, and for a split second, I saw a figure standing behind it. It was tall, impossibly thin, with elongated limbs and a face obscured by shadow. Its eyes glowed faintly, like embers smoldering in the dark. I staggered backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. When I looked again, the figure was gone, but the oppressive weight in the air remained. The chant grew louder, reverberating through the chamber. I turned and ran, the walls seeming to close in around me. The whispers followed, growing sharper, more insistent. By the time I emerged from the cave, the sun was setting, casting the canyon in hues of blood red. My legs shook beneath me as I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. The journal lay at my side, its pages fluttering in the wind. I didn't dare open it again. As I sat there, trembling, I realized the truth. The legends weren't just stories. The Pale One was real, and I had trespassed into its domain. It wasn't done with me yet. The air inside the canyon was thick, suffocating, as if it carried the weight of centuries. My flashlight flickered, its beam trembling against the jagged walls of the cave. The carvings surrounding me seemed to writhe in the dim light, as though alive, shifting to some inaudible rhythm. Each step I took echoed endlessly, a hollow sound that felt far too loud in the oppressive silence. Then came the whispers. Soft at first, barely distinguishable from the wind, they wrapped around me, brushing against my ears like an intimate, invisible breath. I froze, my heart pounding so loudly that I thought it would drown out the sound. But the voices grew clearer, layered and overlapping. Many voices, speaking Cherokee, then English, and then something else entirely. Caleb. I spun around, the flashlight cutting a frantic arc through the cave, illuminating nothing but rock and shadow. My name. It had said my name. I wanted to laugh, to tell myself it was my imagination. But deep down, I knew better. Something was here, something ancient and aware. I pressed forward, trying to steady my breathing, to remind myself why I was here. The journal clutched in my trembling hand seemed heavier now, like a lead weight dragging me down. Its words echoed in my mind. The Pale One watches. It sees all who enter its domain. And then I saw it. At first, it was just a flicker in the corner of my eye, a distortion in the air like heat rising off asphalt. I turned my flashlight toward it, the beam stuttering as though struggling to pierce the darkness. The figure stepped forward, not walking, but gliding, and the air around it seemed to ripple like water. Its face was wrong, blurred, shifting, never quite settling into a recognizable shape. Its eyes, though, they were fixed and unwavering, two orbs of dim, pale light that burned with a cold, unfeeling hatred. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat, as the whispers turned into a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Why are you here?" it demanded, the voice a horrible fusion of man and beast. The words weren't spoken. They vibrated in my skull, making my vision blur and my knees buckle. I didn't mean any harm, I stammered, my voice pitifully small in the cavernous space. I just wanted to understand, to know the truth. It laughed then, a sound that wasn't laughter at all, but a mockery of it. The walls trembled, tiny pebbles raining down as the spirit loomed closer. The truth, it hissed. You are not ready for the truth. You trespass where none are welcome. You defy warnings. You defy the land. Now, you will pay. The world around me shattered. The cave was gone, replaced by a nightmarish landscape that defied reason. The sky blood crimson. The ground beneath my feet a mosaic of shifting faces, all screaming silently. Shadows danced and writhed around me, their forms stretching into grotesque shapes before collapsing into nothingness. I ran, though there was no direction, no escape. The Pale One followed, its form now towering, its presence crushing. With every step I took, it seemed closer, though it never moved. Images flooded my mind, visions of settlers, their faces gaunt with hunger and terror, their screams swallowed by the canyon's endless void. I felt their fear, their pain, as if it were my own. And then I saw her, my great-grandmother. She stood before me, her face solemn, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You should not have come here, Caleb," she said, her voice echoing with both love and reproach. "You've awakened something that should never have been disturbed." The Pale One roared, the sound a cacophony of anguish and rage that shook the ground. My great-great-grandmother's image dissolved, her final words lingering in the air. "Remember who you are. Remember why you must leave." I fell to my knees, my strength gone, as the entity loomed over me, its shapeless face inches from mine. The glow of its eyes consumed my vision, and I felt myself slipping, my mind unraveling under its gaze. "Leave this place," it growled. "But know this, you are marked. You will carry me with you, a warning to others." The air around me erupted in a blinding white light, and I felt myself falling, tumbling through space and time until I woke on the canyon floor, gasping for air, my body battered and trembling. The journal lay beside me, open to a page I hadn't written. "The Pale One watches still. Enter not, or you will become part of the legend." And then I saw it, the faint glow in my reflection, a dim, pale light that burned in my eyes. I emerged from the canyon as a man unmade. My body was battered, my clothes torn, and my mind fractured. Each step toward the tree line felt like I was dragging not just my limbs, but a piece of the canyon itself, its darkness clinging to me like a second skin. The air was heavy, oppressive, as if the Pale One's gaze still lingered, watching, waiting for me to falter. When I finally broke free of the rocky terrain, collapsing at the edge of the forest, I saw her. Lily Standing Bear stood there, silent, as though she'd been waiting for me. Her face was expressionless, yet her eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, held a mix of pity and reproach. "You saw it," she said, her voice steady but low, like a distant rumble of thunder. I couldn't answer. My throat was parched, my voice stolen by the screams I hadn't dared release. I nodded weakly, and that was enough for her to understand. She knelt beside me, her hands cool and steady as she placed them on my shoulders. "You're lucky to be alive," she said. "But you didn't leave unscathed, did you?" I shook my head, the motion causing the world around me to tilt and spin. It let me go," I whispered, though the words felt hollow, meaningless in the vast shadow of what I'd endured. "No," she corrected, her tone sharp. "Didn't let you go, marked you. Look." She pulled a small mirror from her bag and held it up to my face. At first, I saw nothing but the gaunt, pale visage of a man on the brink of collapse. My eyes, bloodshot and sunken, stared back at me. But then, I saw it, a faint, flickering glow in my irises, like embers smoldering beneath the surface. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but once noticed, it was impossible to ignore. What does it mean?" I stammered, my voice trembling. Lily sighed and lowered the mirror. "It means the Pale One sees you now. It means you're a part of the story, its story. Wherever you go, whatever you do, that mark will remind you, and everyone else, that you trespassed where you shouldn't have." Her words struck me like a hammer, each syllable driving home the weight of my mistake. "But I didn't mean any harm," I said, desperation creeping into my tone. "I just wanted to understand, to preserve the legend." "Understanding isn't the same as respect," she replied. "You wanted answers, but you ignored the warnings. You treated the sacred as a puzzle to be solved. That's why I came for you. I wanted to argue, to plead my case, but deep down, I knew she was right. I had let my arrogance blind me, and now I was paying the price." Lily helped me to my feet and began leading me back toward civilization. The walk was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant cry of a bird. But even in that silence, I felt it, the weight of the Pale One's presence, lingering like a shadow at the edge of my vision. When we reached her cabin, she handed me a cup of herbal tea and gestured for me to sit. As I sipped the bitter liquid, she spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "Surviving the Pale One isn't a gift, it's a responsibility," she said. "You've been given a second chance, but it comes with a cost. You must protect the story now, guard it, honor it, and ensure that others don't make the same mistake you did." I nodded, the reality of her words settling over me like a shroud. I knew she was right. My life as I knew it was over, but perhaps, in its place, I could find redemption. Years have passed since that day, and I've kept my promise. I've dedicated my life to preserving the stories of my ancestors, sharing them with reverence and care. But even now, as I write these words, I feel it, the mark of the Pale One, burning faintly in my eyes, a constant reminder of the darkness I faced. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the shadows grow long, I hear it. A whisper, carried on the wind, calling my name. It's a voice I will never forget, a voice that will haunt me until the end of my days. For the Pale One never truly lets go.